You don't see your life directly. You see it through a story about who you are, what always happens to you, what people like you can expect, what success costs, what failure means, what love requires, what is safe to want, what is dangerous to hope for. And once a story has been running long enough, it stops feeling like a story. It starts feeling like reality. You don't think, I'm interpreting this moment through an old narrative. You just feel rejected. You just feel behind, like it won't work, like other people get chosen and you don't, like you're the one who always has to try harder. And because the feeling is so familiar, you assume it must be true. But one of the most important questions you can ask yourself is, am I reacting to what is happening, or am I reacting to the story I'm living inside? Because those are not always the same thing. And if this idea resonates with you, I've put together a free subconscious starter kit that can help you begin understanding how these deeper patterns shape the way you think, feel, and respond. You can find the link below. But for now, let's start with something simple. Life happens, and then your mind tells you what it means. There is a narrator inside every human mind. Not literally, of course, but something in you is constantly interpreting life as it happens. Someone doesn't text back, and the narrator says, they're probably busy, or they're pulling away. You walk into a room and people are quiet, and the narrator says, they must be focused, or they don't want me here. You make a mistake, and the narrator says, that was uncomfortable, but I can learn from it. Or, this proves I'm not good enough. The event may be simple, but the meaning is not. The meaning comes from the story. Most people don't suffer only from what happens. They suffer from what their mind has learned to say about what happens. That doesn't mean the story is fake. It doesn't mean your pain is imaginary. It doesn't mean difficult things didn't happen. It means that somewhere along the way, your mind started organizing those experiences into a narrative, a way of explaining life, a way of explaining you. And over time, that narrative became the lens through which you now see everything else. The dangerous thing about a story is not that it exists. Human beings need stories. We use stories to make sense of chaos. We use stories to remember who we are, to understand where we've been and where we might be going. The danger is when you forget it's a story, when the narrator becomes so familiar that you mistake it for truth. Most of the stories that shape us don't begin as grand conclusions. They begin in small moments, repeated moments, emotional moments. A child tries to express excitement and gets laughed at. She asks for attention and feels like a burden. She makes a mistake and sees disappointment in someone's face. She succeeds and notices that other people become distant. She tells the truth and creates conflict. At first, these are just moments, but children are meaning-making machines. They're always trying to understand what keeps me safe, what gets me loved, what makes people stay, what makes people leave, what parts of me are welcome here, what parts of me need to be hidden. And slowly the mind starts building a story. Maybe the story is, I'm safest when I'm quiet, or people leave when I need too much, or I have to be exceptional to be valued, or if I'm fully seen, I'll be judged, or things don't really work out for people like me. Nobody has to say these things directly. Often the most powerful stories are never spoken. They are absorbed through tone, through silence, through repeated disappointment, through who gets praised and who gets ignored, through what creates closeness and what creates distance. And eventually the story becomes less like a thought and more like an atmosphere, something you live inside. Imagine someone who learned early that they were not usually the one chosen. Not necessarily through one dramatic event. Maybe it was quieter than that. A parent was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. Friends seemed to pair off without them. Teachers praised the louder kids. Their needs were met, but not really noticed. They were included, but rarely sought out. Nothing obvious enough to point to and say, that's the wound, but enough small moments to create a feeling. I'm not the one people choose. And once that story begins to form, the mind starts using it to explain life. Years later, that person sends a message and doesn't hear back. The story says, see, you don't matter. They walk into a gathering and don't immediately feel included. The story says, you're outside again. They publish something and it gets less response than they hoped. The story says, nobody really cares what you have to say. They start dating or building a business or trying to become more visible. And every uncertain moment gets interpreted through the same old narrative. Other people get chosen, I get overlooked. The event may be small, but the story is old. And when an old story meets a new situation, the emotional reaction can feel much bigger than the moment itself. This is why people sometimes feel confused by their own reactions. They say, why did that bother me so much? Why did I spiral over something so small? Why did I immediately assume the worst? Why did I shut down when nothing terrible happened? And sometimes the answer is because you weren't only reacting to the moment, you were reacting to the story the moment activated. This is where the mind can work against us. Once a story is in place, the brain starts looking for evidence, not always consciously, but automatically. If your story is, I always get overlooked, your mind will notice every moment that seems to confirm it. The delayed reply, the missed invitation, the quiet room, the post that didn't land, the person who looked distracted while you were speaking. Meanwhile, evidence that challenges the story may not register with the same force. The friend who did show up, the compliment someone gave you, the opportunity that did come, the person who listened, the small success that helped push you forward. Those things may happen, but they don't always update the story. The mind is often more interested in consistency than accuracy. It wants the world to make sense. And an old story, even a painful one, gives the mind a familiar way to organize experience. This is one reason change can feel so difficult. You're not just trying to think differently, you're trying to loosen a narrative that has been collecting evidence for years. And if that story has emotional weight, it can feel more true than truth itself. In psychology, there is a simple but profound idea. We don't just respond to events, we respond to the meaning we give them. The same event can produce completely different reactions, depending on the story underneath it. One person sees failure as feedback, another sees failure as proof. One person sees silence as neutral, another sees silence as rejection. One person sees success as exciting, another sees success as dangerous. Same event, different story. And the brain is not a passive camera recording reality exactly as it is. The brain is constantly predicting, filtering, and interpreting. It uses past experience to anticipate what things mean now. That is useful. It helps us move through life without starting from zero every day. But it also means the past can become a filter. Not just a memory, a filter. So you don't just see what's in front of you. You see what your nervous system has learned to expect. And if those meanings repeat enough times, they don't just shape your emotions. They begin to shape your identity. The story moves from this happened to me to this always happens to me to this is who I am. That is the moment a story becomes a self-concept. And once that happens, you are no longer just interpreting life. You are living from a role inside the story. The outsider, the responsible one who has to work twice as hard, the one who never gets fully chosen, the one who has to hold it all together, the one who almost succeeds but never quite gets there. And the longer you play the role, the more natural it feels. A useful way to think about this is to imagine living in a house with tinted windows. Every day you look outside and the world seems slightly gray. Not completely dark, just gray enough that you assume that's how the world is. People seem distant. Opportunities seem unlikely. Success seems complicated. Love seems conditional. Rest seems irresponsible. Then one day someone says, have you ever looked at the window? And at first, that sounds strange, because you weren't looking at the window, you were looking through it. That's how stories work. They're not always the thing you notice. They're the thing you notice through. And when you're looking through a story, it can be very hard to tell where the world ends and the story begins. If your story is, I'm behind, everything becomes evidence that you should hurry. If your story is, I'm not safe being seen, every opportunity becomes exposure. If your story is, people leave, every pause becomes a warning. If your story is, I have to earn love, every moment of rest becomes a threat to your worth. And so you don't just live your life, you live your interpretation of your life. This is why your story matters so much, because stories don't just affect how you feel, they affect what you choose. If your story is, I'm not the kind of person who succeeds. You may hold back from opportunities that require you to be seen. If your story is, nothing works out for me, you may quit before the evidence has time to arrive. If your story is, I have to be perfect to be accepted, you may delay everything that would expose you to feedback. The story becomes a map. It tells you where to go, what to avoid, what is safe, what is dangerous, what is realistic, what is impossible. But if the map was drawn from old pain, old fear, or old conditioning, then it may not be showing you the life available to you now. It may be showing you the territory your younger self learned to survive. That is a very different thing. This is why I don't think of story as isolated. Story is part of something larger, what I think of as your inner blueprint. Your blueprint is the hidden collection of beliefs, rules, stories, identity statements, emotional associations, and expectations that shape what feels normal to you, what feels possible, what feels safe, what feels selfish, what feels realistic, what feels like you. The story is the narrative part of that blueprint. It is the explanation your mind has built around your life. Who am I? What happens to people like me? What does success require? What does failure mean? What can I expect from other people? What can I expect from myself? If you don't question that story, you may spend years trying to change your behavior while still living inside the narrative that keeps recreating the same pattern. Because part of you is still loyal to the story that once helped you make sense of the world. Now, I want to be clear about something. The point is not to just invent a fake positive story and repeat it until you believe it. This is not about pretending. It's not about denying reality. It's not about saying everything is wonderful when something genuinely hurts. That kind of positivity can become another form of avoidance. The goal is not to replace one rigid story with another rigid story. The goal is to become conscious of the story you're already inside, because you can't question a story while you believe it is simply reality. You can't update a narrative you don't know you're living. You can't step out of a role you don't realize you're playing. So the first move is not to force a new story. The first move is to notice the old one, to create enough space to ask, is this true? Is this the only interpretation? Where did I learn to see it this way? What story would make this reaction make sense? That last question is powerful. What story would make this reaction make sense? When your reaction feels too big for the moment, there's often a story underneath it. If you feel panic when someone is disappointed, maybe the story is disappointment means disconnection. If you feel shame when you make a mistake, maybe the story is mistakes make me unworthy. If you feel invisible, even when people care about you, maybe the story is I'm the one who gets overlooked. The reaction makes more sense when you understand the story. That doesn't mean the story is true. It means the story is active. So how do you begin? You begin by listening for the narrator, especially in moments of emotional intensity, when you feel rejected, when you feel behind, when you feel ashamed, when you feel like you have to prove yourself, when you feel like you're too much or not enough. Pause and ask, what is my mind saying this means? Not what happened. What does my mind say this means? That distinction is everything. The event is one layer, the meaning is another. Someone doesn't respond. That is the event. They don't care about me. That is the story. You make a mistake. That is the event. I always ruin things. That is the story. Someone else succeeds. That is the event. I'm falling behind. That is the story. The more you can separate the event from the story, the more freedom you begin to create. Enough space to stop treating every old interpretation as fact. The story you're living inside may have begun for a reason. It may have helped you explain pain. It may have helped you avoid disappointment. It may have helped you protect yourself from rejection, criticism, or uncertainty. So this is not about judging yourself for having a story. We all have one. The question is whether the story is still serving you, or whether it is quietly shrinking the life you're allowed to live. Some stories become cages because they are too familiar to question. So this week, notice the narrator. Notice the meaning that your mind adds to the moment. Notice when a small event creates a big reaction. And ask, What story would make this reaction make sense? Whatever it is, don't rush to fix it. See it first. The moment you can see the story, you are no longer completely inside it. You are beginning to become the author, and that changes everything. If this helped you recognize that there may be more happening beneath the surface than you realized, I've put together a free subconscious starter kit to help you begin understanding how your deeper patterns shape your thoughts, emotions, and behavior. You can find the link below. For now, carry this question with you. What story am I living inside? Remember, breakthroughs begin within. Bye for now.